This coming Sunday is Proper 26, or the 21st Sunday after Pentecost. But are not going to contemplate the gospel text for this Sunday because next Tuesday is November 1st, which is All Saints' Day. When I was pastoring at Signs of Life Fellowship, the All Saints' Day worship service was always one of my favorite services to plan. And since I'm not currently pastoring a congregation, I decided to take this opportunity here to mark this holy day by noting it with you all today. All Saints' Day helps us remember and give thanks for those who have lived before us. The author of Hebrews 12 encourages us to remember that great cloud of witnesses that surrounds us. Their lives, their stories, their witness encourage us and cheer us on. On All Saints' Day, we recall the stories of people from our own families, congregations, and communities who have passed on. These stories ground us in our history and teach us about God's faithfulness from generation to generation. These are the pioneers of our faith, and they begin in the pages of Scripture and lead us on to today. We aren't the first people who have decided to follow Jesus, and we won't be the last. Many others have gone before us, and many will go after us. This is the communion of saints referred to in the Apostles' Creed. Likewise, these texts that we contemplate week after week have been pondered by so many others. We aren't the first to come to these texts with question after question after question. So I find that so very comforting, especially texts that have some puzzling parts, as many texts do. Like our text today that Gaffney chose for All Saints' Day, Matthew 27:50-56. In this passage, we find ourselves at the cross, at the moment where Jesus relinquishes his spirit, causing the curtain of the temple to rip from top to bottom and the earth to crack open. Dead bodies are raised to life, but oddly, they stay in the tombs until after Jesus is resurrected. At that point, they walk around and appear to many. So it's kind of a perfect passage for Halloween, don't you think? I want to read you what N.T. Wright has to say about this passage. Just a couple of paragraphs from his commentary. He says, Matthew wants us to look on to the final restoration, God's great new world, the time of renewal. God is already making all things new, and the death of Jesus is the key event through which this can now happen. But it all begins, to our astonishment, with some of those who had died and been buried long since. It isn't quite clear what Matthew wants us to think here. Did these sleeping bodies wake up at Jesus' death, but wait until Easter morning to go into the city? What did they do then? What happened to them? These and similar questions have encouraged some to think that Matthew intends us to see the story as picture language, a vivid view of saying, from that moment on, death was a defeated force. Or He may simply, in reporting stories told at the time and afterward, be happy to leave this as a loose end in his own narrative, a way of saying, from now on, you never know what God's life-giving power will achieve. It was, of course, a hint of what would come at the end of all things, the great final resurrection of which Paul and others would speak. Certainly, Matthew intends that as we read this story, we should look ahead to the full results of Jesus' death. The disciples, including the women watching from a distance, see only darkness, gloom, and death. But Matthew's reader already knows what they will discover 3 days later, that this death was not the failure of Jesus to show himself as the Son of God, but the way in which his identity, vocation, and mission were confirmed and accomplished. As we join our voices with the centurion and others, the cloud of witnesses, in declaring that Jesus was indeed God's Son. I added that cloud of witnesses part, by the way. In declaring that Jesus was indeed God's Son, so we commit ourselves to living by that faith and to learning every day by looking at the Son more about the love of the Father. So I think this is a good passage for All Saints' Day, not only because it deals with death and resurrection, but also because the timing is a bit confusing. How exactly do we place ourselves in the scene when the scene has a glimpse of 3 days later or 2 days later? It bounces around in time, the changing perspective of characters from Matthew's original audience, from the perspective of the characters in the story to Matthew's original audience. And of course, we also have our own perspective that informs our imaginations as we contemplate. Time becomes a bit fluid or communal. So we kind of are entering into that cloud of witnesses as we imagine this scene together. So let's see where the Spirit leads us and leads our imagination as we contemplate our text today. Before I read the passage, I will light my candle as a symbol of God's presence with us here today. And I will pray for our graces to know Jesus more intimately, to love him more intensely, and to follow him more closely. Matthew 27, 50 to 56. Jesus cried again with a loud voice and relinquished his spirit. Then look, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom in two. And the earth was shaken, and the rocks were split. And the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Then after his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were standing guard over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly this man was God's Son." Now there were many women there from a distance watching. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had ministered to him. Among them were Mary the Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. The word of the Lord. Before I guide you through the passage with questions and pauses, I invite you to take a couple of centering breaths. Breathing in God's Spirit. And breathing out anything that distracts you from being in the presence of God. And I pray again for today's graces to know Jesus more intimately, to love him more intensely, and to follow him more closely. I invite you to enter the story. The setting of our story is a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. What does it feel like to be standing in a place with that name? At this place, there are 3 crucified men. Perhaps it is difficult for you to see them because for the past 3 hours, since noon until now, darkness has come over the whole land. How do you feel about this strange midday darkness? What do you notice about the men being executed? Two of the men on the left and on the right are rebels. Do you know them? Is anyone present there grieving their deaths? The man in the middle is Jesus. Above his head, the charge written against him states, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Can you see this sign? What do these words mean to you? What is your relationship to Jesus? How close are you standing to him here in this scene? Perhaps you're standing far away. Or maybe you're right there next to him. Are you able to look really close at him? Can you see his face? Can you see his wounds? Perhaps your gazes meet. What are you feeling? What emotions stir within you? What sounds do you hear? Just then, Jesus cried again with a loud voice and relinquished his spirit. Does the sound of his voice startle you? What does it feel like to be in the presence of Jesus's body that no longer breathes? How do you react? Do you notice how the people around you react? Is anyone displaying their deep feelings of anguish and sorrow by rending their garments, tearing them from top to bottom? Or perhaps some are putting ashes on their head. Maybe some are crying out in pain. Maybe people are too afraid to say anything. How do you react? Then look, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom in two. What does it sound like when this thick veil is spontaneously ripped in two? How do people respond? What thoughts are going through your mind? And the earth was shaken and the rocks were split. As you feel the earth quake, how do you react to the adrenaline racing through your body? Do you run for cover? Do you freeze in place? Perhaps you move to protect those around you from debris that might be falling. Is it still dark outside, even though it's the middle of the day? What can you see around you? What do you hear? What chaos is happening around you? And the tombs were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Are you aware that as Jesus gave up his breath, these dead bodies regained theirs? If so, how does this affect you in this moment? This moment of fear and panic, this moment that the earth is shaking. Then after his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. We'll just sit and ponder this a moment. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were standing guard over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly, this man was God's Son." Take a moment to consider their fear. What might these Roman guards risk by making this statement? What might they risk had they not made this statement? Now there were many women there from a distance watching. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had ministered to him. Among them were Mary the Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. How are these women responding to the events that just occurred? Why do you suppose they are watching from a distance? What might they be risking by being here at Golgotha, place of a skull? Do you interact with any of them? If so, what do you learn from them? I invite you to spend the next 10 minutes in a colloquy with the divine. Speak to God about what you experienced during this contemplation, especially the parts of the story that caused you to experience strong emotions. What might God want to say to you about your life or the life of your community as it relates to this story? When I sound my chimes, this will indicate that you have about a minute to wrap up your colloquy, after which time I will end the silence with this week's psalm. If you're doing this contemplation later with the recording, go ahead and hit pause now and spend as much time in contemplation as you feel you need, and then restart the video when you're ready to hear the psalm. I will close our silence with Psalm 67. May God be merciful to us and bless us. Show the light of God's countenance and come to us. Let your ways be known upon the earth, your saving health among all nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide all the nations upon earth. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. The earth has brought forth her increase. May God, our own God, give us God's blessing. May God give us God's blessing. May all the ends of the earth stand in awe of God. Amen.